The wrench slipped from my oil-stained fingers the moment I heard the doctor's voice. Metal hit concrete with a sharp clatter that echoed through my Cleveland garage like a gunshot. "Mr. Kowalski, I'm afraid I have tragic news about your son, Ethan." The words bounced around my skull without finding a place to land. Ethan, a tragedy. My boy was only 42. Strong, successful, living a life in Boston I could barely imagine. I slid down the garage wall until I hit the floor, the cold concrete a stark shock against my back through my thin work shirt. "Sir, are you still there?" the voice on the phone asked, distant and clinical. "I'm here," I managed to say, though my own voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. "When did this happen?" "Around 11 o'clock this morning. A massive heart attack at his office. The paramedics did everything they could, but he was already gone. Already gone." The two words twisted in my chest like a knife. My gaze drifted to the underside of my neighbor's old Ford pickup, the one I was supposed to be fixing. Oil stains mapped out years of repairs, a history of things I could put back together. I had spent 36 years of my life under hoods just like this one, my hands sure and steady, fixing things that were broken. But I couldn't fix this. After hanging up, I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes. The afternoon heat pressed in, carrying the scent of Ohio dust and motor oil. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but nothing would ever be the same again. My legs shook as I pulled myself up and stumbled to my workbench. There, next to a coffee can full of screws, sat a framed photo of an 8-year-old Ethan holding a base he'd caught at Lake Erie. His gap-toothed grin could have powered the whole city. My phone felt impossibly heavy as I dialed Amber's number. It went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Amber Sterling. I'm unable to take your call right now." Her voice was crisp, professional, the same way it always was. Like talking to a machine instead of family. "Amber, it's Art," I said, my voice cracking. "I just heard about Ethan. Please, call me back as soon as you get this. We need to talk." I tried again 20 minutes later. Same result, then again an hour after that. By the 6th attempt, my hands were shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. "Amber, this is the 6th time I've called," I said into the void of her voicemail. "I know we don't get along, but this isn't about us anymore. Your husband, my son, is gone. Please, just call me back." Silence was the only reply. In a moment of raw frustration, I threw the phone against the garage wall. It clattered across the floor, the battery cover popping off. The quiet that followed was enormous, pressing in on me like deep water. The decision formed slowly, the way rust creeps across untreated steel. I couldn't sit here in this garage waiting for Amber to decide I was worth a phone call. He was my son, my only child. I walked into the house and pulled my old canvas duffel bag from the closet. My hands moved on their own, packing 3 changes of clothes, my shaving kit, and the photo of Ethan with his fish. The sun was setting, painting my quiet street in long, mournful shadows. Tomorrow, I would lock up this place, this life I knew, and drive east. Toward a son I would never see again, and a daughter-in-law who wished I never existed. The truck door slammed shut as the first hint of sunrise painted the Ohio sky pink. The highway stretched ahead like a gray ribbon of possibility I did not want. Interstate 90 would take me through Pennsylvania and New York, a long, lonely path into the heart of a life I never truly knew. 12 hours of driving with nothing but my own thoughts, and the ghosts of conversations I would never have with Ethan again. Miles clicked by in a blur of rust-colored bridges and forgotten factory towers. The radio offered traffic reports for a world that kept spinning, indifferent to the fact that mine had stopped. I turned it off. Silence felt more honest. Somewhere outside Buffalo, a memory ambushed me. Ethan, at 8 years old, standing in our small backyard with a baseball glove that was far too big for his hands. My late wife, Margaret, was hanging laundry on the line behind us, humming a tune I could no longer recall. "Dad, when will I be as big as you?" Ethan had asked, squinting up at me in the bright afternoon light. "Hold the ball with both hands, son. You'll get there," I had told him, kneeling down to adjust his grip on the warm leather. "Just remember to keep your eye on the ball, no matter how fast it comes at you." He had nodded with the solemn intensity that only a child can muster. We must have spent an hour out there, the simple rhythm of a ball passing between a father and son, while Margaret's white sheets danced in the breeze like flags of surrender. The memory hit me so hard I had to pull over at a rest stop. I sat in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel while tears blurred the highway into a watercolor smudge. When had we stopped playing catch? By evening, Boston sprawled before me, a circuit board of glittering lights. My old pickup felt smaller here, a relic from another era, dwarfed by the sleek foreign cars that flowed around me like schools of expensive fish. Ethan's neighborhood was a maze of historic brownstones and glass towers, a world of perfect brick sidewalks and silent, disapproving windows. I found the address and pulled up to a building with a stern-looking doorknob and gates that looked like they belonged on a castle. Through the polished brass bars, I could see a lobby that looked more like a modern art museum than a place people called home. Amber met me at the front door. Even in grief, she was flawless. A simple black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Makeup applied with surgical precision, not a single blonde hair out of place. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my dusty work boots and the wrinkles in my travel-worn shirt. "You look terrible," she said. It was not a statement of concern, but an accusation. She turned and walked into the apartment without another word, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floors. I followed, feeling like an intruder. The penthouse was vast and white and cold. Minimalist furniture was arranged with a precision that suggested it was never actually used. On the wall, a gigantic abstract painting in shades of blue and gray only added to the feeling of being in a gallery, not a home. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing toward a white leather sofa that looked like it would stain if you breathed on it too hard. She remained standing, a queen in her sterile palace. "I have started making the arrangements," she said, her tone making it clear that my input was neither needed nor wanted. "The funeral home, the service, everything is under control." "Oh, I have already selected the venue," Amber announced the next morning, scrolling through images on a tablet that was thinner than a dinner plate. "It's a beautiful, modern chapel in Beacon Hill, very elegant." She spoke of Ethan's funeral the way one might plan a corporate event, focused on aesthetics and logistics rather than love or loss. His mother, Margaret, she is buried at a small cemetery back home in Ohio, I said, my voice quiet in the cavernous, silent apartment. Ethan used to visit her grave when he was young. He always said he wanted to be next to her. Amber's laugh was as sharp and cold as breaking ice. "Oh, Arthur, that was a lifetime ago. Ethan always wanted cremation. He told me many times. He found cemeteries dreary. We will keep things simple, clean." Her idea of simple was a service that would cost more than my house. Before the funeral, I asked if I could see his office. She waved a dismissive hand toward a set of heavy oak doors. "Be my guest." He spent most of his time in there toward the end. The room took my breath away. It was not the office of my son. It was the headquarters of a king. A massive mahogany desk, clean as a surgical table, faced a wall of glass that overlooked the entire city of Boston. Awards for real estate and finance lined the shelves, gleaming gold and crystal trophies that felt cold to the touch. Photos showed him shaking hands with smiling strangers in expensive suits. There was nothing of the boy who loved fishing here. Nothing of me. I ran my calloused hand over the smooth, polished wood of his desk, feeling the profound distance between the man who had built this empire and the man who had taught him how to change a tire. At the funeral home 2 days later, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. Amber held court near the entrance, a tragic star in her designer black dress, surrounded by women with flawless makeup and men who checked their stock portfolios on their phones while whispering condolences. This was not a gathering of mourners. It was a networking event with a casket. I took a seat in the back, an unwanted ghost at my own son's farewell. From there, I watched the theater unfold. Then I heard her voice, a stage whisper meant to be overheard. "Look at that old man in the back," she murmured to a blonde woman clutching her arm. "That's his father." Ethan was so ashamed of him. The blonde woman, a friend of hers, I supposed, glanced my way with an expression of unconcealed pity. "Joyce, darling, surely he is grieving too." He barely visited. Amber's response was pure venom, sweetened with fake sorrow. Now he shows up wanting to play the loving father. Ethan told me the man never understood his success, always made him feel guilty for creating a better life. The lie was so audacious, so cruel, that it stole the air from my lungs. I had never been anything but proud. I had just been too foolish, too intimidated by this world of hers, to say it often enough. My chair creaked as I stood up, the small sound echoing in the funereal silence. The whispering stopped. Every eye turned to me. I walked toward her, not with anger, but with a quiet resolve. "Amber," I said, my voice steady. "Today is about my son. Let us focus on him." Her expression shifted instantly into one of wounded dignity. "Of course, Arthur. You are right. We all grieve in our own way." She nodded with practiced solemnity, but her eyes, cold and hard as diamonds, promised there would be a price for this public correction. As the last of the guests filed out of the chapel, leaving behind the heavy scent of wilting lilies, I felt a profound sense of isolation. Amber was already by the limousine, surrounded by her friends, their quiet laughter, a jarring offense in the somber afternoon. I was turning to leave, to find my way back to my lonely truck, when a woman with kind, dark eyes stepped in front of me. She was younger, maybe in her late 30s, and her black dress was simple and respectful. "Mr. Kowalski?" she asked softly. "My name is Maria. I was Ethan's executive assistant for 5 years. Amber let me go the day after. Well, the day after." Her voice was filled with a genuine sorrow that I had not seen all day. "I am so sorry for your loss. He was a good man, a fair boss." I could only nod, my throat tight with unspoken words. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder toward Amber's group. "I know this might not be my place," she said, lowering her voice, "but I wanted you to know he talked about you more than you might think. A few months ago, he was working late on his personal estate planning with the lawyers. He looked so tired. He told me he was spending so much time on it because he had to make things right, to make sure you were taken care of no matter what." She gave my arm a gentle squeeze. "He loved you very much, Mr. Kowalski." Before I could ask what she meant, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd. Her words were a small, flickering candle in the vast darkness of my grief, making things right. What could that possibly mean? My thoughts were interrupted by Amber's voice, artificially bright and loud. "Everyone, we are not going to be sad. Ethan would want us to celebrate his incredible life. We will have drinks back at the penthouse. A toast to my wonderful husband." It was an order, not an invitation. And so I found myself back in that cold, white apartment, a reluctant guest at my own son's wake-turned cocktail party. The place was buzzing with conversation. Amber moved through the room, a tray of champagne glasses in her hand, her laughter the loudest of all. "This place is beautiful, but a bit too large for just one person," she said to a man in an expensive suit. "I am thinking of selling. Maybe a year in Paris, or perhaps Milan. Ethan always promised he would show me the world." She was spending the money before his body was even cold. She was erasing him, replacing his memory with her own desires. The candle of hope that Maria had lit within me flickered and nearly died. Whatever Ethan had planned, it was no match for this woman's bottomless greed. I slipped out, unnoticed, an hour later. The next morning, a call came from a number I did not recognize. "Mr. Kowalski, this is Marcus Thorne, your son's attorney. The reading of Ethan's will is scheduled for this afternoon at 2 o'clock in my office." His voice was professional, leaving no room for questions. And so, a few hours later, I found myself standing at the foot of a glass and steel skyscraper in Boston's financial district. I felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. I was here to be formally dismissed, to have my last tie to my son legally and officially severed. As I rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the 42nd floor, I held on to Maria's words like a prayer, making things right. It was the only thing I had left. The office of Marcus Thorne was on the 42nd floor, a sterile space of glass and chrome that seemed to float above the city. Amber sat at the head of the long, polished conference table, flanked by her 2 closest friends, looking for all the world like a queen holding court. She was radiating a confident boredom, as if this whole process was a tedious but necessary final step before her new life could begin. I sat at the far end of the table, my worn flannel jacket a stark contrast to the room's expensive minimalism. As Mr. Thorne arranged the thick, ribbon-bound documents before him, Amber turned to me. Her voice was syrupy with false pity, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. "Arthur, you really do not need to stay for this. Do not expect a single penny from my husband's $30 million estate anyway. This is really just a formality." Her dismissal was the final twist of the knife, and I almost stood up to leave. But I had come this far. I would see it through to the end. I would hear my son's final wishes, even if they were to erase me completely. Marcus Thorne cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the tense silence. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Ethan Stewart." He began with the smaller bequests, a collection of vintage watches to a cousin, a significant but not life-changing sum of money to his business partner. With each minor gift, Amber's smile grew more confident, her posture more regal. She was the main event, and she knew it. Then, Thorne turned to a new page. He paused for a fraction of a second, his eyes briefly meeting mine before returning to the document. The air in the room grew thick with anticipation. "To my beloved father, Arthur Kowalski," he read, his voice calm and steady. "I leave the majority of my estate, including all business interests, stock portfolios, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $29 million. The words hung in the air, seeming to bend the very light in the room. I felt the blood drain from my own face. 29 million. It was a number so vast, so impossible, it had no meaning. Across the table, Amber's face had turned the color of chalk. Her perfectly painted smile was frozen, a grotesque mask of disbelief. Thorne continued, his professional tone unwavering. "To my wife, Amber Sterling, I leave the Beacon Hill condominium, valued at approximately $800,000, along with all furnishings and personal effects contained therein. Number." The word was a choked whisper. Amber's hand flew to her chest, her breathing shallow and rapid. "That is impossible. That cannot be right." She shot up from her chair, her carefully constructed composure shattering like a dropped vase. "This is fraud," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "He did this. That old man manipulated Ethan when he was sick. You poisoned him against me." I was too stunned to speak, the number still ringing in my ears. Marcus Thorne stood slowly, a bastion of calm in the storm of her fury. "Mrs. Sterling, I assure you this will was properly executed and witnessed. These were your husband's legal wishes." "I was his wife!" she screamed, sweeping her arm across the table, sending the legal documents scattering across the floor like expensive confetti. "I loved him. I took care of him. You think you can just waltz in here and steal my life?" She spun towards the door, then turned back, her face a mask of pure rage. "This is not over, old man," she snarled, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Not by a long shot. I will see you in court." And with that, she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass walls trembled. She left behind a stunned silence, a fortune I never asked for, and the promise of a war I did not know how to fight. Back in my motel room, the official documents were spread across the cheap polyester bedspread. The Desert Inn's flickering neon sign cast red and blue shadows over the legal jargon, and the impossible number, $29 million. The scent of old cigarettes and disinfectant seemed to mock the fortune that was now terrifying like mine. I felt no joy, no sense of victory. All I felt was the crushing weight of a responsibility I had never asked for, and a son I was beginning to realize I had never truly known. This was not a gift. It was a puzzle, a final, heartbreaking message I could not yet decipher. I sat there for hours, the city humming outside, a world away. I was a mechanic from Cleveland. My hands knew how to fix engines, not how to manage stock portfolios. My biggest financial decision in the last year had been whether to buy a new set of wrenches. In the depths of my confusion, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life, I made the only call that made sense. I called Frank. He picked up on the second ring, his familiar, gruff voice, a lifeline back to a world I understood. "Art? It is past midnight here. What happened, friend?" I told him everything, the funeral, the coldness of the penthouse, Amber's final insult, and the number that had shattered my world. I spoke in a rambling, disjointed way, the words tumbling out in a rush of grief and disbelief. Frank listened patiently, the silence on his end a comforting presence. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he said, with the simple certainty that had defined our 50-year friendship, "I am on the next flight out of Cleveland." And 3 days later he was there, filling the cramped motel room with his solid, reassuring presence. Frank was a retired factory foreman, a man who understood steel and sweat and loyalty. He looked at the legal papers with a practical eye, unfazed by the zeros. "That boy saw something in you worth trusting with all this," he said, tapping a weathered finger on the document. "Do not dishonor his memory by doubting his judgment now. His arrival was like an anchor in the storm." We spent the next 2 days talking, not about the money, but about Ethan. We remembered his first home run in Little League, the time he tried to fix his own bicycle and ended up with grease all over his face, the quiet pride in his eyes on his college graduation day. Frank helped me see the son, not the stranger. The fragile peace was shattered by a sharp knock on the motel room door. A stern-faced courier stood in the doorway, holding a thick envelope. "For Arthur Kowalski," he said, handing it over. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was the official notice of the lawsuit from Amber. The pages were filled with dense, intimidating legal language, but the accusations screamed from the page: undue influence, emotional manipulation of a vulnerable individual, exploitation of a father, some relationship for financial gain. Each word was a poisoned dart, painting me as a predator who had preyed on his own grieving son. The war Amber had promised was no longer a threat. It was here, a physical document in my hands, designed to destroy not just my inheritance, but my character. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the papers feeling heavier than a tombstone. Frank put a steady hand on my shoulder. "All right, Art," he said, his voice firm. "Now, we fight back." Marcus Thorne's strategy was the opposite of the chaos Amber was creating. His office was a fortress of calm, methodical preparation. "Amber has hired Damian Pierce," he told us during our first meeting, his voice devoid of alarm. Frank and I sat across from his vast desk, the city of Boston a silent witness behind him. "You need to understand, Mr. Pierce does not argue facts. He creates narratives. He will tell a story to the judge, a sad story of a grieving widow being cheated by a manipulative, absentee father. He will try to make you the villain." Frank grunted. "Art Kowalski couldn't be a villain if he tried." "I know that," Thorne said, a rare, thin smile touching his lips. "And that is why our strategy will be simple. We will stick to the truth. The truth is our only weapon, and in this case, it is all we need." The weeks leading up to the trial were a grueling education in legal warfare. We spent days in depositions, a process where Damian Pierce was allowed to question me for hours on end. He was a shark in a $1,000 suit, his questions designed to twist my words and paint my entire life in the worst possible light. "Is it not true, Mr. Kowalski, that you had not seen your son in nearly 2 years?" he would ask, his voice dripping with insinuation. "Yes, that is true," I would answer honestly. "And is it not true that you only reappeared in his life days before this new will was drafted?" "That is a coincidence I did not know about anyway." Frank was my rock through it all. Every evening we would return to the motel, and he would remind me of what Thorne had said. "Just tell the truth, Art. Let that snake tie himself in knots." Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The Los Angeles County Superior Court was an imposing marble building, its hallways echoing with the weight of 1,000 other battles. As we entered the courtroom, I saw them. Amber sat at the opposing table, dressed in a somber but impeccably tailored suit, the very picture of a wronged widow. Damian Pierce was beside her, whispering in her ear, his confidence radiating across the room. Our side looked less impressive. A stoic lawyer, a retired factory foreman, and a mechanic in a new suit that felt stiff and unnatural. The contrast was not lost on me. It was their world, and I was the intruder. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The room fell silent. Damian Pierce began his opening statement, his voice filling the courtroom with practiced theatrical emotion. He painted a masterpiece of a story, telling of a brilliant young man, weakened by illness and depression, who became susceptible to the psychological games of a father who had abandoned him for decades. He called me a vulture, swooping in at the end to claim a prize I had not earned. When it was his turn, Marcus Thorne was the opposite. He stood and spoke in a calm, factual tone. "Your Honor," he began, "the evidence will show that Ethan Sterling was a sharp, mentally competent businessman until the day he died. It will show he made a deliberate, legally sound choice to leave his estate to his father. This is not a case about emotion or narrative. It is a case about facts and a son's final, legally binding wish. The battle lines had been drawn. It was his story against our truth. Amber was the first to take the stand. Guided by Damian Pierce, she played her part to perfection. She spoke of Ethan's supposed depression, his deep-seated guilt over their strained relationship, and his vulnerable state in the months before his death. Her voice would break at precisely the right moments, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek as she recounted fabricated stories. Arthur's calls would upset him for days, she testified, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Ethan felt such pressure, like he had failed as a son. He became obsessed with making amends. Pierce guided her through a narrative that transformed our few, brief phone calls into a campaign of psychological manipulation. When it was Marcus Thorne's turn to cross-examine, the atmosphere shifted. He approached her not with aggression, but with a quiet, surgical precision. "Mrs. Sterling, you claim your husband was deeply depressed. Did you ever encourage him to seek professional help?" I was his help," she stammered, caught off guard. "I supported him emotionally." "So, the answer is no," Thorne stated flatly. He moved on. "You have testified that Mr. Kowalski's calls were manipulated. The phone records show they spoke only 3 times in the 6 months prior to Ethan's death. The longest call was 7 minutes. Does that sound like a sustained campaign of coercion to you?" Amber faltered. "It was not the frequency. It was the emotional weight." Her words trailed off, the lie exposed by the simple, cold fact of the phone call. When my turn came, I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me as I walked to the witness box. My hands shook slightly as I swore the oath. My new suit felt like a costume. Thorne's questions were simple, and I answered them with the only thing I had, the plain truth. "Mr. Kowalski, did you ever ask your son for money?" "Never. Not once in my life." "Did you know the contents of his will before it was read in Mr. Thorne's office?" "Number, I thought he was leaving me his old baseball glove. It was a joke between us." A few people in the courtroom gallery smiled at that. "What was the last real conversation you had with your son?" I had to think for a moment, the memory suddenly sharp and painful. "We talked about the Cleveland Browns. He called me after a game, asked me if I thought they had a chance at the playoffs this year. We talked for about 10 minutes. It was nice." The cross-examination by Damian Pierce was as brutal as I had expected. He stalked back and forth before me, firing questions meant to paint me as a bitter, resentful old man. "You disapproved of your son's marriage to my client, did you not?" he boomed, pointing a dramatic finger at me. I paused, taking a deep breath. I looked at Amber, her face a mask of nervous anticipation. Then I looked directly at the judge. "I thought she married him for his money," I said, my voice clear and steady in the silent courtroom. I paused, letting the words settle, before adding the final piece. Turns out, I was right. A quiet gasp rippled through the gallery. Pierce was momentarily speechless. In that moment, all the legal maneuvering, all the polished lies and theatrical tears, seemed to collapse under the simple weight of that single, undeniable truth. Sleep had been impossible. I spent the night staring at the water-stained ceiling of the motel room, the judge's stern face etched into my mind. The next morning, the drive back to the courthouse felt like a funeral procession for a life I was not even sure I wanted. We all assembled in the silent courtroom. Amber and Damian Pierce were already there, a united front of nervous energy. Frank sat beside me, his solid presence the only thing keeping me grounded. The judge entered with the measured pace of someone who carried the weight of lives in her hands. She did not waste time with pleasantries. After a careful review of all evidence and testimony presented, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "This court finds the will of Chad Michael Fox, also known as Ethan Sterling, to be legally valid and executed with the testator's full mental competency. Amber's sharp intake of breath was the only sound. The disappointed expectations of an heir do not constitute grounds for overturning a properly executed legal document, the judge continued, her gaze sweeping over Amber. No credible evidence of undue influence has been presented. Therefore, the will stands as written. Case dismissed. Her gavel fell with a crack that felt as final as a slamming coffin lid. It was over. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees washed over me, but it was followed by a deep, aching sadness. The war was won, but I had lost my son all over again in that courtroom. In the hallway, Amber cornered me one last time, her composure finally gone, replaced by a desperate raw fury. "You will never enjoy it," she hissed, her face pale and drawn. "Every dollar you spend will be a reminder of the son you ignored." I looked at her, and for the first time I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Only a hollow pity for a woman so empty that money was the only thing she could value. I turned and walked away without a word, Frank at my side, leaving her alone with the ruins of her greed. Later that afternoon, we were back in Marcus Thorne's office, signing the last of the endless paperwork. The mood was not celebratory, but somber. As we finished, Thorne reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a single, sealed envelope. "There is one last thing," he said quietly, his professional demeanor softening. "Ethan left this for you to open only after everything was settled. His instructions were very specific. He handed it to me. My name was written on the front in my son's familiar, slightly rushed handwriting. My hands, calloused from a lifetime of working with steel, trembled as I took the letter. It felt heavier than all the legal documents combined. For the past month, lawyers and judges had spoken for my son. Now, finally, I would hear from him one last time, in his own words. This was his final message, the key that might unlock the reason for everything. I held the past and the future in my hands, and I was not sure I was ready for what it contained. I did not read the letter in the city. Frank and I drove in silence until we found a quiet overlook, the sprawling lights of Boston twinkling below us like a falling constellation. There, in the familiar cab of my old truck, with my oldest friend beside me, I finally broke the seal. The paper was thick and expensive, but the handwriting was unmistakably my son's. "Dad, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. It also means you won the fight I knew was coming, and for that I am so sorry and so proud. I am sorry for what Amber put me through. I saw her true nature far too late, caught in a world that valued success more than character. I saw how she looked at me, and it shamed me that I never stood up to her properly. She saw me as a bank account or a heartbeat. But you always saw the boy with the fish. You saw the kid who was prouder of a base from Lake Erie than any building he ever bought. In the end, that is the man I wanted to be again. This inheritance is not a burden. It is my final apology for the distance I let grow between us. It is my way of making sure the man who worked his hands to the bone for me can finally rest. Use it to live. Pay off your mortgage. Fix up the house. Buy that boat you always talked about. And go fishing. This money is not a monument to the man I became. It is a thank you for the father you always were. I love you, Dad. I hope you knew that. Ethan, the carefully constructed dam I had built around my heart for the past month, finally broke. I lowered the letter and wept. I wept for the son I had lost, for the years we had wasted in awkward silence, and for the profound, beautiful love that had been there all along, buried under miles of money and misunderstanding. Frank sat beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder, saying nothing, which was everything I needed. I never moved into the penthouse. Working with Marcus Thorne, I established the Ethan Sterling Foundation, a charity that provides scholarships to young men and women attending trade schools in cities like Cleveland and Boston, helping them build lives with their hands, just like I had. I kept enough to live comfortably, to ensure I would never have to worry about another repair bill again. Today, I am back in my garage, in Cleveland. The old Ford pickup is still here, but now I work on cars because I want to, not because I have to. The air still smells of oil and steel, but it is the smell of peace now, not struggle. On the mantelpiece inside my house, the photo of 8-year-old Ethan with his prize fish sits in a brand new frame. His gap-toothed grin shines out, a daily reminder that the greatest fortunes are not measured in dollars, but in a love so strong it can reach across death itself to finally say everything that needs to be said. Thank you for joining me on this journey. The story of a father's love and a son's final powerful message is one that reminds us of what truly matters in life. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. What did you think of Amber's downfall and Ethan's ultimate plan? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to you. Thank you for watching.